All right, welcome to CrimeTalk, and this may be the first of many where we talk about cases from the past, maybe a history unveiled perhaps, where we're going to dissect the stories that haunt our past. I'm your host today, and today we're diving into the heart of one of America's most notorious criminal cases, the 1892 Lizzie Borden murders. The brutal killing of Andrew and Abby Borden shocked the nation, but it was the trial of their daughter, Lizzie, that captivated the public. How did a Sunday school teacher accused of hacking her father and stepmother to death walk free? Today, we'll focus on the trial itself, zooming in on the evidence, or lack thereof, that shaped the outcome. So buckle up for a tale of shaky testimonies, missing murder weapons, and a courtroom drama steeped in cultural bias. So let's set the scene. It's August 4th, 1892 in Fall River, Massachusetts, a textile hub simmering with class and ethnic tensions. Andrew Borden, a wealthy but frugal 69-year-old investor, and his 64-year-old wife, Abby, are found dead in their modest 2nd Street home. Abby is bludgeoned with 19 hatchet blows in the second floor guest room. About 90 minutes later, Andrew is struck 10 or 11 times in the first floor sitting room, his face obliterated. Now, the murders are brazen, committed in broad daylight on a busy street, yet no one hears or sees anything suspicious. Lizzie Borden, Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, claims she was in the barn when her father was killed, only discovering his body upon returning. She calls the family's Irish servant, Bridget Maggie Sullivan, who was resting in her attic room after washing windows. Now, the police are baffled. There's no robbery, no sexual assault, no clear motive. Suspicion soon falls on Lizzie, whose inconsistent statements and a lack of visible grief raise some red flags. After a week of investigation, she's arrested and charged with murder. By June of 1893, Lizzie's trial in the New Bedford Superior Court becomes a national spectacle. The prosecution, led by Bristol County District Attorney Hosea M. Knowlton, faces a daunting task, proving that a well-bred, unmarried woman committed a crime deemed unthinkable for her class and gender. The defense, bolstered by former Massachusetts Governor George D. Robinson, argues that the case is built on speculation, not evidence. Let's unpack the trial's key elements: the physical evidence, witness testimony, and the cultural force that tipped the scales. The prosecution's challenge is monumental. They must convince a jury that Lizzie, a church-going Protestant nun, wielded a hatchet with lethal force. But their evidence is thin, riddled with gaps that the defense eagerly exploits. So let's break it down. First, the murder weapon, or rather the lack of one. The prosecution believes the killer used a hatchet, a common household tool, smaller and lighter than an axe. Police recovered 2 hatchets and 2 axes from the Borden cellar, but none conclusively matched the wounds. A Harvard University chemist, Professor Edward S. Wood, testifies that he found no blood on these tools, a significant blow to the prosecution's case. There's a curious detail, though. One hatchet, found in the cellar, had a broken handle and it's covered in ash, as if someone tried to clean or disguise it. The prosecution suggests this could be the weapon, but without blood or other forensic evidence, obviously DNA didn't exist back in 1893, they can't prove it. The defense counters that the Borden household, like many, had multiple tools, and that the broken hatchet is completely irrelevant. The absence of definitive murder weapon becomes a cornerstone of the defense's argument. No weapon, no case. Next, the issue of Lizzie's clothing. The prosecution argues that such a bloody crime would have left the killer drenched in blood. 2 days after the murder, Lizzie hands over a dress she claims to have worn on August 4th. A chemist examines it and finds only a minuscule spot of blood on the hem, hardly incriminating, as it could be from a minor injury or menstruation. The defense emphasizes this, arguing that a guilty Lizzie would be covered in blood. not sporting a nearly pristine dress. But the prosecution has a trump card, the testimony of Alice Russell, Lizzie's friend and respected member of the Central Congregational Church. Russell drops a bombshell during the grand jury proceedings, later reiterated at trial. She testified that on Sunday after the murders, she saw Lizzie take a dress from a pantry closet and burn it in the kitchen's cast iron coal stove. Russell, distressed by her initial omissions, consulted a lawyer before becoming forward, adding credibility to her account. Now, the burning of the dress is the prosecution's strongest evidence, suggesting Lizzie destroyed incriminating clothing. But the defense pounces on weaknesses. Russell can't confirm the dress was the one Lizzie wore on the murder day, and no one else witnesses the burning. The defense also argues that the burning old clothes was common in 1893, especially in the frugal household like the Bordens. They paint Russell's testimony as unreliable, possibly motivated by pressure or misrecollection. The jury is left with doubt. Was the dress evidence of guilt or just a household chore? Another piece of the puzzle is Lizzie's attempt to buy prussic acid, a deadly poison, from a Fall River drugstore the day before the murders. The prosecution argues that this shows intent to kill, even if the murders were ultimately committed with a hatchet. A druggist, Eli Benz, testifies that Lizzie requested the poison, claiming it was a cleaning for sealskin. When he refused to sell it without a prescription, she left. But the judge deals a blow to the prosecution, ruling that the prussic acid testimony is completely inadmissible. They argue that the prosecution failed to refute that the acid could be used for innocent purposes like cleaning. The exclusion weakens the prosecution's narrative of premeditation, leaving them with a key piece of circumstantial evidence. Now, the prosecution also relies on Lizzie's own words, or rather her contradictory ones. During the inquest held 5 days after the murder, Lizzie testifies for 3 days without a defense lawyer. Her statements are a maze of inconsistencies. She claims she was in the barn when her father was killed, but her timeline is vague and conflicts with other accounts. She says she heard nothing unusual despite the violent nature of the attack in a small house. Her inability to account for her movements during Abby's murder when she was likely in the house raise suspicion. The prosecution argues that Lizzie's shifting stories point to guilt, but the defense has an explanation. Morphine. Dr. Seabury W. Bowen, the family physician, testifies that he prescribed a double dose of morphine to Lizzie to sleep after the murders. He claims that the drug's side effects, confusion, and disorientation could explain her muddled testimony. The defense also notes that the inquest was a closed inquiry with no legal counsel to guide Lizzie, making her statements less reliable. The jury's already skeptical of the prosecution's case finds the explanations plausible. Next, the prosecution tries to build a circumstantial case based on the crime scene. Only Lizzie and Bridget were home with Abby when she was killed, and Bridget was outside washing windows. And when Andrew was murdered, Bridget was resting in her attic room, leaving Lizzie as the only person unaccounted for. The prosecution argues that the timing and opportunity point to her guilt, but the defense dismantles this. They highlight that no one saw Lizzie with a hatchet and no bloody clothes or physical evidence tie her to the crimes. Bridget's testimony is vague. She heard nothing unusual and can't confirm Lizzie's exact whereabouts. The defense also points out that the house was unlocked, meaning an intruder could have entered, though no evidence supports this theory. The lack of direct evidence, obviously, fingerprints, blood splatter analysis, or modern forensic, leaves the prosecution grasping at straws. Now, Lizzie's defense team, led by Robinson, a former governor who appointed one of the 3 trial justices, knows how to sway a courtroom. Their strategy is simple but effective. Emphasize the absence of evidence and lean into Lizzie's social status. Now, the defense capitalizes on Lizzie's image as a virtuous Victorian woman. She's a Sunday school teacher, a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and a board member of the Fall River Hospital. And to her supporters, she's a Protestant nun, incapable of particide. The defense argues that a woman of her breeding and delicate constitution lacks the physical strength and moral degeneracy to commit such a brutal act. In court, Lizzie plays the part. She appears tightly corseted, dressed in flowing black, holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a fan in the other. Newspapers described her as quiet, modest, and well-bred, far from a brawny, muscular killer. The defense knows the jury, mostly Protestant farmers and tradesmen, some with daughters Lizzie's age, will struggle to see her as a murderer. The gender paradox is key. In a male-dominated courtroom, Lizzie's performance as a helpless maiden undermines the prosecution's narrative. The defense systematically dismantles the prosecution's case. They call the lack of a murder weapon fatal to the state's argument. The dress with a tiny blood spot is dismissed as irrelevant, and the burning dress incident is framed as a routine act misconstrued by an overzealous witness. The defense also highlights the police's shoddy investigation, noting that the crime scene was poorly secured, with dozens of people trampling through the house before evidence was even collected. The defense calls character witnesses, including Dr. Bowen, who vouches for Lizzie's innocence and explains her morphine-induced confusion. Emma Borden, Lizzie's sister, testifies that her sister had no animosity toward Abby, countering rumors of a family tension. While neighbors and police suggest otherwise, Emma's testimony carries weight as a family member. The jury is a significant obstacle for the prosecution. Fall River residents are excluded from the pool, leaving a jury of 12 men from smaller agricultural towns in Bristol County. Half are farmers, others are tradesmen, and most are practicing Protestants. Only an Irishman makes it through selection, reflecting the era's native bias. The jurors, some with daughters like Lizzie, are predisposed to see her as a victim of circumstance. The justices further tilt the scale. One, appointed by Robinson during his governorship, delivers a charge to the jury described by major newspapers as a plea for the innocent. The justices also exclude critical prosecution evidence like the prussic acid testimony and limit the testimony about family discord. Knowlton, the prosecutor, despite a 5-hour closing argument, praised as eloquent, knows a conviction is unlikely. He hopes for a hung jury, which would allow him a retrial if new evidence emerges. After deliberating for just an hour, the jury returns a verdict, not guilty. They pause for an hour before announcing, avoiding the appearance of haste. The courtroom erupts in cheers from Lizzie's supporters, women groups, and much of the press. But the acquittal doesn't erase the shadow over Lizzie's life. Freed, Lizzie and Emma moved to grand Victorian houses on the hill, but Fall River's elite shun her. She becomes a local oddity, followed by curious children and charged with shoplifting in 1897. Her relationship with Emma sours as they part ways in 1905, never reconciling. Both die in 1927, buried alongside Andrew and Abby. The rhyme, Lizzie Borden took an axe, cements her infamy, though it exaggerates the weapon and the number of blows. The prosecution's case crumbled under the weight of the missing evidence and the cultural bias. No murder weapon, no bloody clothes, and no eyewitnesses left the case resting on circumstantial clues. The burned dress, the prussic acid attempt, and Lizzie's inconsistent statements. But these were undetermined by a lack of forensic tools, a sloppy investigation, and a jury swayed by Lizzie's status. Her wealth secured a top-tier defense, and her gender, cast as too delicate for violence, sealed her freedom. Nativism also played a role. Early suspicion fell on immigrants, delaying focus on Lizzie. The Irish police who interrogated her were seen as overstepping by her social class, fueling sympathy, yet the Fall River Globe's class-driven accusation and Alice Russell's testimony suggest Lizzie's guilt was plausible. The truth remains elusive, lost in a fog of doubt and prejudice. The Lizzie Borden trial wasn't just about evidence, it was a battle of perception in a divided society. Was Lizzie a cunning killer who exploited her privilege, or a misunderstood woman railroaded by a flawed system? We may never know. Let me know. Share your thoughts with us about History Unveiled. Did the lack of evidence clear Lizzie, or did justice slip through the cracks? That's all we have for you today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.